Today's topic, it's tips for developing conscious relationships. The thing about relationships is I use this term very broadly. So I want to start off by thinking about relationships very broadly. So we're not just talking about romance. We will talk about romance because it is a big deal. And a lot of us are really driven and interested in romantic relationships and being conscious in those relationships. But I also want you to consider your work relationships, your relationships with your parents, your relationships with your kids, relationships with friends, coworkers, colleagues, employers, employees, clients, students, and on and on and on. All of those are different types of relationships, and they can be conscious or unconscious depending on what you're bringing to the moment. I do also want to initially emphasize that there's no perfect relationship. Sometimes we have this kind of ideal that likes to hide out in all of our backs and minds. And if you ask ourselves, if we're asked directly, say, no, I don't want a perfect relationship, because we know that's the wrong answer to give. But the more truthful answer is often, yes, we want some sort of perfect relationship that never feels bad. And so our boss is always nice to us, our employees are always work well with us, our friends, are always kind to us, our romantic partners are always in agreement with us, right? All these types of things that we don't really want to admit that we want, but we really do want them. And we have a lot of hidden beliefs that have to be illuminated. This, of course, is the beginning of all of our paths, and developing conscious relationships are illuminating our own hidden beliefs. We have to know what we're bringing to the party. If we don't know what we're bringing, then we're not going to understand a lot of how other people respond to us. A lot of times people respond very negatively to us, and we have no real appreciation to how we're perceiving the situation and to how we're interacting with others. That lack of awareness, of course, causes more problems because other people are usually unaware of their own issues. And so your negative response is usually met with more negativity, and, then things can kind of spin out of control. And this can happen even with people that you would probably get along with. People that could be good friends or lovers or business partners, that because of your own inner issues and the way you're projecting yourself and others and the way you're framing the situation through your beliefs in your mind, is causing you to interact with a situation that is to a detriment to actually things you really would want. That's the irony of a lot of fear. A lot of fear keeps us away from the very thing that we're trying to get. And since so many of our egos really operate in those terms of trying to get something, it's actually important that in all the different relationships in your life, maybe pause and to journal about it, or at least talk to a friend about what are you actually trying to get here? What are you trying to get from a friendship, a romantic partnership, a business partnership? A lot of times we assume that you are one that we know, and we assume that other people know. And then when we start to look into it, we start to realize that we don't know, and the other people don't know either. I'll say, this is really what I was trying to do. And they'll say, oh, is that what you're trying to do this whole time? And like, I didn't know that. And you're like, well, I thought it was obvious. Hopefully we can have some humility and not get caught in our pride. Be like, oh no, I made sense. It's their problem. We really don't put too much in other people at first. The spiritual path, especially when we're very early on, and even afterwards, we like to look at ourselves to be clear, to be sure we know how we're interacting, why we're interacting, and what we're putting out there. The more we understand that, then we can start to say, oh, somebody else is lost in their illusion. But too quickly and too often, people do this. They just start in the spiritual path. They have a little awakened experience. They get this glimpse. They think it's the big awakening thing. They won't tell everybody this is how they should be living. And now everybody else isn't as conscious as they are, right? Blah, 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 blah. Right? This is just more unconscious programming that's trying to make the world behave a certain way so that you can feel a certain way. And a lot of what we're ultimately trying to get through relationships are feelings inside of ourselves. So your work relationships are usually attempts to get feelings of safety, right? That's work and money, and then being able to get resources comes to this feeling of safety. And then with romance and friends, it tends to be, if I have this person and they behave a certain way, then I get to feel loved. But of course, safety and the feeling of love are inside you. And on the spiritual path, as we grow and become more conscious, what we're saying is that I am in charge of my feelings. I choose my feelings. Nobody makes me feel a certain way. Anytime you say that somebody made you feel a certain way, you're lying to yourself. Nobody makes you feel. It even gets to the physical level that if I don't have nerve endings in my hand, you can slap my hand and you still can't make me feel. No, obviously the body and things there are a little bit different in some respects, but as far as the emotional sense, nobody makes you feel. There are just so many hidden beliefs and interpretations that go on so quickly that your emotional response seems to be made to be happen by somebody else. Even if you use the metaphor of somebody's pushing your buttons, well, then the button is, connected to a bunch of circuitry in you. A button unconnected to anything doesn't do anything to you. Right, that's why you can be in a situation with another friend and some other friend is talking and it completely angers your one friend. Well, it doesn't bother. You don't have that button and you don't have that circuitry underneath it to be triggered. It was just more hot air coming out of someone. Nobody makes you feel your emotions. You choose them. And that is so important to understanding when you're developing yourself consciously and when you step into relationship with somebody else, because now you're coming from a greater place of power. When you expect other people to do things for you to make you feel a certain way, you have given up your emotional power. You're now enslaved. You're now also a victim. And of course, we don't like to feel enslaved or feel like victims. And so this leads very quickly into control. I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff, especially in romantic relationships, like these different things about like kind of trying to train your partner to behave a certain way, like they're an animal or something. And of course, some of it works, and it's all part of manipulation and control because you don't want to be feeling victimized. And of course, this isn't going to feel ultimately good to your partner or in any situation where we start to get into control. Like all these different seduction things that people do, it's all control to get somebody to do something so you can feel a certain way. So really the central first tip for developing conscious relationships at any level is owning your feeling state, owning your feelings. That you understand that what other people do can be interpreted multiple ways. In a lot of respects, as we get more and more conscious, it's kind of interesting how we realize we were misinterpreting things as love. So if you've grown up in a toxic family, right, this unfortunately creates a lot of mixed up ideas around what love is. And so somebody can be angry at you, and the way your belief system works is that this is a form of love. They care about you because that was the form of expression of love. That's the attention you got growing up. And so that was your idea. And so when somebody is overtly kind to you, you actually misinterpret it as some sort of manipulation or confronting issue, because that's also how that was. And so when they're angry, you feel more loved and connect to somebody. When they're overtly loving and kind to you, you want to pull away because you don't trust it. These are actually misinterpreted feelings now, right? And so this completely gums up relationships people get into. And of course, it leads people to be in more and more toxic relationships. So being able to do those deeper issue work that I'm always talking about to understand how your mental programming is working helps you to start to step into more conscious relationships and generally more healthy relationships, because now you can say, this person is actually offering me love. The appropriate response here is to be open-hearted. When somebody's angry, actually, we still stay open-hearted in a conscious relationship as well, right? That's part of how we mature. But step one, just being open-hearted with overt love. It's amazing how often people have trouble with that. It happens all the time for me. I'm a very overtly loving person. And when I offer that, a lot of people have a sense of kind of pulling in that it's not real, it's not trustworthy, or misinterpreting it too. Because just because I'm loving doesn't mean there's a romantic imperative behind it. That's another important aspect to cultivate to develop conscious relationships, is this practice of being open-hearted, regardless of what's emotionally going on around. The practice of being loving to all the people in your life. Open-heartedness is like having an open set of eyes, another set of open eyes. It helps you to see what's actually there. That's a big piece of conscious relationships. You just have to see what's actually there. Because then you can respond to it. In the case of romance, a lot of what romantic relationships are like two people coming, and they've got some nice jewelry and beautiful pieces to bring to this relationship, and they drop that in the middle, and then they have the huge sacks of trash and drop that in the middle. And then a lot of people turn away and look at the picture they have of the other person when they're not, by not looking at the person and the trash and the actual things in the relationship in the middle. That's one of the ways that people get caught up in their fantasies, their projections of, I want this guy to be Prince Charming, and this is my damsel in distress, or just pick your different metaphors and archetypes, because we're doing lots of those. And I want my happily ending, all these fantasies, right? And so they're looking at this picture, and they're not looking at the person or the actual gifts the person has, as well as all the trash that's in the middle of the room. This is the nature of unconscious relationships that leads to immense amounts of suffering and upset, ignorance, avoidance. Sometimes you get one person looking at what's in the room. This can often turn into the fixer type. The person who's always trying to fix the other person. But if the other person is still looking at their projection and they want their fantasy, it doesn't work too well. Sometimes you get two people both looking at it, but then they're only really looking at one person's trash. So here's the codependent fixer and the other person who's the victim who wants to be fixed. And the pile of trash for the codependent fixers can be completely ignored. And often that doesn't necessarily clean up the trash particularly easy, because the victim still needs to stay the victim in that situation. The fixer still needs to be the fixer. Otherwise, their connection, that karmic connection, dissolves. So in a conscious relationship, really, we're bringing two people, and it doesn't have to be romantic. It can be anything, to acknowledge these are our gifts and these are our issues. And especially, for those of us who are joining in a spiritual way, we're saying we're going to help each other work on our issues. Right? So in this way, we don't take on somebody else's trash. We don't say, oh, I'm going to get upset that she had a bad day at work. I don't need to. That's not my issue. Her issues with her boss at her work are hers to work on. I can reflect. I can be with her. I can offer her some ideas about ways to engage with the issue within herself. I can give her space to work through it. Right? That's the orientation towards it. And a lot of people will say this, but when push comes to shove, they really don't. People like to have somebody else to bitch with them. Otherwise, they don't feel heard, right? That's an aspect of a lot of issues. It's like we think there was somebody else bitching with us and recycling negative energy and being upset. Somehow we're being heard. And a lot of times when you're neutralizing, and I do this a lot in the work that I do, I'm not responding actively to that. It's just what this person's experience is. I'm just actively listening to it. I'm actively engaged with it. And I had this beautiful compliment from one of my newer students. Has never felt so listened to. But that's a really important quality of conscious relationships, that listening to, staying open-hearted, practicing being loving, allowing the other person to work with their issues, but you're still able to point them out from time to time. Say, that I think you're really not dealing with the issue you have with your power. It just keeps showing up in your relationship with your boss. That's not fixing it for the other person. That's helping to shine a light on something. That's a lot of the spiritual path in general. We're just shining lights on things. Say, this is what's here. There's also a lot more humility in conscious relationships. It's not false humility. There's a lot of false humility running around that people get confused about. And that's where we self-denigrate. And so it hides a lack of self-worth. We self-denigrate, say, oh, I'm not that good. You get a lot of that in spiritual circles. People, oh, I'm not as good as the Buddha or as Jesus, right? And that's not what Jesus and Buddha were teaching. So clearly they're not paying attention to their teacher. They're just self-denigrating. And that serves a number of different functions, such as not having to live up to any sort of ideals, although living up to ideals is another topic. But it's the sense that, you can kind of get away because you're not good enough. It's like, well, if I'm already kind of bad and crappy as a person, then this is my lot in life. I can't be as good as this, so I don't have to try. There's a deep state of equality that we're all part of. And the beautiful part of the spiritual path is this is accessible. This awareness, this space of being is accessible to all of us, which makes us responsible for all of us. So true humility has that quality of responsibility because we're being responsible on a lot of levels. We're not saying we can't do things we can't do. So if the relationship that we're talking about is a business relationship, that's actually really important. A lot of people get promoted above their skill set or take on things that they're just not good at. It's not that being good at everything is important, but rather you know where your strengths and your skill sets are, and it's okay to explore new things and to improve it, different things. But say you're walking into a particular surgery and you know that somebody else has a better skill set with this particular type of surgery than you do as a surgeon. That's humility. To say, you know what, to serve this patient best, I don't have the skill set I would want to do this here, but I do know somebody else and I'm going to let them do that who's in my practitioner group. We'll just make that the business relationship now. You have a group of physicians. So that's the importance of true humility, right? This surgeon in this example isn't saying I'm bad as a surgeon. I'm just saying that I understand my limitations and I understand when it's time to reach out to help. And that is a level of true humility. Conversely, it's also okay to say, I am really good at this type of surgery. This is the one that, works best for me. And being able to claim that space is also a type of humility and responsibility at the same time. It walks right into different areas of romance, of partnership. So if you're a mom and a dad, it's all right, to be humble and say, I'm not a very good dad. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to want to say that, or I'm not a very good mom and I need to learn, right? That humility facilitates change. If there's pride in the way, then you don't reach out for help. You don't go find the books you need. You don't ask advice from other friends. You don't engage with places where you need to grow. And of course, as a parent, that only leads to suffering and issues for your children. Right? Children are just such powerful teachers. They're going to reflect so many of your issues. And conversely, as I said before with the other surgeon metaphor, it's okay to say, no, I actually am really good at this type of parenting or this type of thing or working with a troublesome child. And, that can lead to being helpful to other people, other parents coming to you for that advice. And that's still a type of humility, right? We're still seeing what is. Right, so being in that role where you're a really good parent, you're a good parent, you know how to work with certain things and offering yourself to others if that feels true to you or if people are already coming to you. That's another type of seeing those jewels that I was talking about, that jewelry and those beautiful qualities we bring to relationships that's sitting in between you and whatever the relationship is. And it's an honoring of that. We really do see and honor everything in the relationship. That's a central trait to conscious relationships. I mean, we don't see everything, right? But that's also a form of humility, is understanding that we don't see everything, that we do have blind spots. And a lot of times, it's going to be people who are close to us who are going to see those blind spots better than most, and they're going to help us grow further and be able to deal with more of our trash. And so where the unconscious relationships, most people are really resistant to making those deep inner changes. Even people say, oh yeah, I'm changing, I'm growing, and things like that. Usually have to be drugged tooth nail through broken glass and to get them out of that old mindset. Or at least they feel like they're being drugged through broken glass. They're actually being freed because they're standing in it. The major tip, of course, is you start with yourself. You start with yourself because the more aware you are of who you are, of what your trash is in the room, I think that also leads to humility and compassion, right? A big, big quality and a big important aspect of developing these conscious relationships is compassion. People know what they know, and they don't know other things. And so we learn different compassionate ways to offer feedback. We offer feedback, we offer thoughts, we offer space. Right? This isn't about changing somebody, as I said before, the perfection ideal that likes to hide in our beliefs. That really needs to be worked on first in any relationship. Right? The perfect business partner, there's all sorts of ideas we have about what this person should do, rather than looking at what is their skill set. And if you bring them into your partnership, you're taking on their different weaknesses as well as their strengths. And you start to look, is this going to be a good balance between us? What type of business partnership whatever you're creating? And are there other people that we bring in with those skill sets that we're both missing? Right? This is all still part of humility. And sometimes actually businesses are better at that than other relationships. There's something about, it triggers that survival issue that in a strange way forces people to go find the things they know they absolutely need. And so you've got like your visionary type, because that happens. I live out in the Bay Area, so there's a big, strong startup culture. And so you get the visionary, the person who has the big idea, and then you've got the finance person, the person who knows how to make the money, and you got the person who knows how to develop the thing, whatever the thing is. Right, it's like a Tesla car or something like that, right? Elon Musk is very much the visionary type, that catalyzes a lot of enthusiasm and gets the ideas going and things like that. And then you've got the developer, right? So you start to put all the pieces together because you recognize what pieces you have and what you don't. And so in a very interesting way, I won't say it's enlightened, but it is more conscious approaching of relationships than a lot of other things. And I think this is actually, in some respects, there's some pieces that I think any partnership, a romantic partnership, can really benefit from. Because, they always talk about one of the big things that nobody talks about when they get into a relationship is money. And that is a huge issue when you're going to be combining finances and providing for yourself, and you have a family, and then you're providing for a family. And so being able to consciously say, well, neither of us is good at finances, which one of us can learn, to get better at this, or how are we going to approach it, or how are we going to just find an accountant together and who can help us manage our money, or a financial manager or something like that. That's a very conscious way of stepping into relationships. Some people do that and a lot of people don't, but because it's one of those aspects that doesn't get looked at, we just think we all immediately have all the skills that we need to be in a working, healthy relationship. I'm just bringing that up. There are plenty of other ways that we're not as good at. There's usually assumptions that we're all great at sex, and we're not. That's also a learned trait, learning from your partner. There's different like Western Tantra classes and things like intimacy classes that can help people to understand that. And this, of course, will trigger a whole lot of shame, which likes to hide things, or we like to pretend we're the best at everything all the time. Some people do. Not every. Other people will go the other respects, but they think they're never good at anything, including sex, and we'll be constantly looking for other people's opinion as opposed to trusting their own inner knowing, which isn't any better. So the development of humility will go a long way towards seeing clearly And then seeing clearly that helps you to develop conscious relationships. But because most of you are probably new at developing these types of relationships, one of the big things is just finding other people like friends, kind of a low risk situation where you can say, hey, I want to develop a spiritual friendship, a conscious friendship. And then because nobody's going to know what that means for the most part, or anybody who thinks they know what they mean will probably have a very different definition than you. And then you start talking about it. What is this relationship? What does it mean to be in a conscious relationship with this other person? Right? Obviously, I'm offering you some ideas about this, but everyone's going to be different about how you want to work with issues. If you want to work with issues as much, some spiritual friendships I've had, like they're definitely more issue based. There's just like there's a lot of processing and discussion around issues, and that's where the relationship stays focused. Others is going to be a little bit more casual, and that's okay too, but it still doesn't close eyes to things that come up, to issues that may be brought up in the light of that friendship and that connection. And usually the more deeply connected we are, the more issues get pushed up. It's like the intensity increases. You can't drag someone on the spiritual path. It just doesn't work that way. If somebody wants to remain in ignorance, that's just going to be their choice. But it doesn't have to stop you from continuing to be more aware of what's going on within you and with the people in your life. That awareness does engender change. It's never the change that you quite expect. But especially in a romantic partnership, in a marriage, when one person starts acting, responding differently, the other person has to respond differently. Maybe not immediately, and maybe not in ways that you would enjoy, because a lot of people don't want to change. But it is really important to start to be true to yourself if you haven't done that already, to own your emotional qualities, right? As I said at the very beginning, that you're not expecting a feeling from your partner, right? That will change how you interact and respond to somebody. As I also said before, a lot of times people are still trying to make their partner be spiritual like them, or whatever that should mean, rather than continuing to own their own inner space, say, I own my feelings, I own my joy, I own my bliss. I don't have to wait for this person to do something to make me happy. And if they do something and there's a part of me that gets angry, then that anger is mine. That anger was already here. I often say that if you're scared or sad or angry in a situation, generally speaking, that anger and sadness and fear was already here. It's just coming up in light of this situation. It's old wounds that we carry around. That becomes more and more true as we dissolve beliefs. That usually is kind of the first step. For a lot of people, we work in the mind first because that's usually what's kind of perpetuating cycles. So as you take care of the mind and you're letting go of beliefs, then it gets a little bit easier to work into the emotional and physical and energetic pay dirt, where a lot of the old issues that came up, these upset feelings that we didn't fully process because we got taught to hold on to them, to hide them, avoid them, shove them down. They're still there. And so we have to work there. So if you want to develop conscious relationships, own your feelings, get to know yourself. When you want to create changes in your relationship contracts, because that's essentially what's gone on, is a lot of unconscious contracts. Talk to the person involved. See if they're willing to come along on this journey. Even if they're not, continue to do your own work and to change your behaviors. If before, when your partner would get super angry, you'd get super angry too, neutralize your anger. Don't be upset that they're still angry. If you're upset, that just means there's still more anger in you. Then you have to go within, as I've talked to many of you before, anger to me is a guard dog. It's like smoke coming from a fire. We don't get too worried about the dog or the smoke. We want to know where the fire is, and we want to know what the dog is hiding, which is usually some sort of wound or fear. And so what happens in the relationship is actually it's going to start to have to change when you're changing your behaviors like that. And maybe your partner calms down a lot quicker. It's like, oh, well, that person's not getting so upset, so I won't. Or maybe they'll get even more upset because they're used to connecting that way. And that can be the end of the relationship. I usually want people to have their partners in the relationship because I want you to either come to a sense of completion or just learn as much as you can. The only exceptions tend to be physical abuse, emotional abuse, and there can be severe mental abuse. Like there are people who do mental control and weird stuff like that you need to get out of. But a lot of the lighter jib jab and chatter that goes on in relationships, it'll teach you more. And a lot of it won't bother you as you let go of your own issues. And so then what was so upsetting before is no longer there, and how you respond to somebody in your life changes, which forces them to change. It becomes more and more difficult if we become grounded in ourselves for other people to not change to us because they have no center. And this isn't manipulation. This is just what starts to arise. It's not going to arise because you're trying to change them. It's because you're changing yourself. And children will always reflect this the quickest. Humility just seems to be my theme of the day. That in not trying to change others and being humble and owning both your greatness and your darkness, it's just so much easier to see everything. It's easier to see other people. It's easier to see what your beliefs are about and why you had certain fantasies that are now being torn down. It's easier to see what relationships actually are supportive. That's a big eye-opener for a lot of people. A lot of people have never been in supportive relationships. Sometimes in my work, I am the first supportive relationship somebody's ever had. And they just utterly don't know what to do with me. I'm just sitting here listening, smiling, talking from time to time. And so the encouragement is to learn how to support ourselves first. And then we start to learn how to support somebody else. And we ask a lot of questions. We ask for permission. We ask for forgiveness when we feel like we've overstepped a boundary. Permission, forgiveness, I don't remember the full title, but there's a blog I wrote some time ago and I updated it. I occasionally update the older ones. So this act of asking for permission is important because in conscious relationships, there's this quality of invitation and permission that you get invited in. It's no longer trying to get something from somebody else or get to a feeling. For a lot of known time, the paradigm for the usual romantic dance is that one person pursues and the other's pursued. And so that's not an invitation permission thing, right? That's this very aggressive submission dominance thing that goes on in a lot of relationships. And it's not just romance, it goes on in many other places. So asking for permission in that space is very different, and inviting people into your sacred spaces or just into your work life is a very different feeling. And it changes the quality of relationships right there, because when you can invite somebody in, then it tells the other person they don't have to work so hard to get to know you, that you know how to let them in. But you have to know how to let people in, and it starts by letting yourself in. If you can't open your heart to yourself, you're not going to be able to open your heart to somebody else, and you get caught up in the whole pursuit and all these games we play, to get somebody else to open your heart for you by pursuing you with flowers and roses and serenading you, or, whatever it happens to be. I mean, it goes in all different directions of who's pursuing whom and how they pursue. Right? This happens, as I said, a lot in romantic relationships. And then, of course, somebody used to being pursued. When somebody asks for permission, it feels different. And a lot of people won't like that. It'll feel weak or something like that, or they'll have lots of ideas that just get in the way because they're not used to it. It falls outside their belief system. And so there is a quality of newness that is going to be showing up when you start developing conscious relationships. In general, there's usually a quality of the unknown vulnerability to get used to. As you get used to it, it allows the relationship to unfold and grow in its own way. So there's an organic nature that when both people are engaged, things start to want to shift on their own. And when things start to shift on their own, you start to see what a relationship really is and what it really can be, and it can grow on its own. And it takes work, but it doesn't take as much work as all these other relationships that we're just killing ourselves over. Because we're probably not in alignment with them, we're not in our truth, we're not seeing things clearly, we're caught up in an image we want things to be, but that's not what the person, the situation is. And finally, the last piece I want to emphasize is conscious relationships understand and embrace that they have to be let go of. Fundamentally, every relationship we have is going to end. Whether it ends in 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 decades, it's going to end. So just in bringing that when you're developing, like, say, a new conscious friendship, to understand that you're both going to continue to grow and this will end. And just build that little belief. It's not even anything you have to really believe in because it's the truth. That's the thing about truths. You don't really have to actually believe in because things are going to grow and change and end. That's just part of human nature. Well, these are some of my initial thoughts. If people have some questions you'd like to ask, feel free to type in the chat pod and we'll continue talking together. Hi, Tobias. What is the difference between trying to fix the other person and helping the person to shine light on their issues? That's a great question. I think it's a quality of feeling. I think it's a quality of communication. So if I want to share something with somebody, that I feel like is an issue, what I tend to say is I'd like to offer you a reflection. So when I'm saying that, usually I've talked to somebody beforehand that's kind of my signal that I want to offer something they may not see about themselves. It could actually be a good thing. But by doing that, I'm actually asking for permission to share something. And I'm signaling to them that there's something that I feel like is important enough to share in this way. And so that combination empowers the other person to know more about themselves. They actually have the power to say no. A lot of the fixing other people is kind of like the advice that no one wants. It's like your mother coming up and saying, you really need to clean up your room, right? That's the advice you didn't want to hear. You didn't ask for it. You didn't want it. And you're probably not going to do it because of the way it was delivered to you, right? She's trying to fix your room to conform to her idea of what a room should look like. So I think that quality of asking for permission, again, is one of the key ways that we help shine light on some things for other people. And it also is going to show you who this other person is, because more often than not, if I ever say that to any of my friends, they say yes. It's like I can't think of too many times. And to my own credit, like I think the only time that, I've said no, this was like one time, and I know when I said it and I know why I said it. And so it was a fairly conscious decision. I just wasn't in the space to hear the reflection. I had too much other stuff going on inside that I was working with first. So I think that approach is a big thing. But also with that, you have to let go of the end result. So if you have an idea of what this person should look like or sound like or feel like or whatever, you have to let that go, because how people are going to change and grow is very likely not going to conform to what you think. And it's amazing how people can take one set of advice and you think, well, then they'll go do this or that, and then they go do this other thing entirely different, which may actually be perfect for their growth. So the letting go of that end result. The bigger issue it tends to be, of course, if something is really unhealthy for us. But I think you still approach it in that way. And if something truly is unhealthy, then you have to leave the relationship. Because if somebody's not willing to engage in an issue that is really not being healthy, like this person's always yelling at you, right? That would be an issue. Say, I'd like to offer a reflection. And it's like, the way you yell at me, I don't appreciate it. If they're not willing to work on something like that, then you start to say, why am I in this relationship? What do I think I'm getting here? And maybe you let it go. Let me know if that helps, Tobias. And thank you for the question. Good. I'm glad it did. What else are on people's minds today? I also want to emphasize that developing conscious relationships is a journey because we're not used to doing that. We just kind of step into relationships and assume that everybody knows everything about each other and that it should just work. And that's just not the case. Even with people who know conceptually that relationships take work, a lot of times we still don't want to do work. We still want it to just kind of figure itself out. And usually in the way that we saw mom and dad. And so if you had a good mom and dad and they had a good healthy relationship, then we still expect it to work that way, and it won't, because that's not how it is. I'm speaking to romantic relationships, right? You're two different people from your parents, your parental figures. So I'm just thinking out loud. We have humility as a key part. Developing humility will help you a lot in developing a conscious relationship. Engaging with your partner that this is something you want to do, having a discussion about that, what it means to both of you. Spending time over the days and weeks, whoever you're talking to about this, to get the ideas together, to see what they mean. Some people can get very conceptual and don't really understand what something means on an everyday basis. Getting comfortable giving each other feedback. Like I was saying to Tobias, I'd like to offer you a reflection. That's my term for using it when I want to share something I think somebody doesn't know about themselves. And as I also said, some of those reflections are actually beautiful things. So as I said, along with the trash and the jewelry, like sometimes I'm pointing out the jewelry. It's like, I don't realize that you're just a great listener. You're a great orator. You're really amazing with the kids. You're right. All these different things that sometimes people don't realize. And a lot of times we don't realize these beautiful gifts that we have. And those, especially in romantic relationships who are closest to us, often see them most clearly. And then we don't tell each other these things. We seem to be waiting. Yeah, Tobias, that's essentially what I'm saying. You ask for permission to offer advice. So when I'm saying, may I offer you a reflection? Reflection, just think of it like, you're being a mirror to something else, to someone else, right? So that's what I mean by reflection. I mean, that's essentially what's happening when people come to work with me. It's like there's already that sense of permission to hear what I have to say. Right? That's why you're here. You've given me permission to talk. If you didn't give me permission, you wouldn't be here. Otherwise, I'm not shouting this off at the street corner, It's like I don't have a need to project out wisdom in that way. And I have a blog that already does that more than enough. That is my street corner. I have a YouTube channel. And that's enough. It's enough to keep up with. What's resonating for people? What are you thinking about? Tony says humility. It's a good one to think about. And as I said, making the distinction between what's false humility and true humility is really important, because there's a lot of false humility where we self-denigrate things. So like that could be like self-denigrating some of those jewels I was mentioning, that jewelry, such as being a good listener. It's like, if you're a good listener, you're a good listener. You don't have to say, oh, I'm not that good at it. No, you are. That's false humility, is that, oh, I'm not so good at it. It's a self-worth issue. What else are people thinking about? Hi, Ciara. Thanks for coming. I think this is the first time you've joined me. If not, correct me. If the other person in the relationship doesn't want to listen to the advice or isn't ready to see these things about themselves, then what should you do? Well, you have to go in and ask yourself, why are you here? Why are you in this relationship? If you can compassionately offer, this opportunity to share and to connect and to grow, you start to look at why are you here? And you probably have to start to have a conversation. This is just another way you have to offer. It's like, I want to have a conversation about our relationship and how it's structured, because one of the key hallmarks of a conscious relationship is the dedication towards spiritual growth, both of you. You're going to grow in life anyway. You might as well just acknowledge that that's happening and choose to row the boat, as opposed to having the ocean toss your boat wherever the heck it wants to toss it. But you can't make people change. You can't make them think a certain way or act a certain way. And that's part of the humility in all of this, is understanding that there's a lot of things that aren't going to get better according to our ideas of what better is. And we have to sit and see, if we work through any issues we have around whatever this is, can we be at peace at that? If in being at peace, the way this person is interacting still doesn't work, then we let them go. Because that too, as I said, is also a big piece of being in conscious relationships. We know we're going to have to let them go. Thank you for the question, Ciara. Let me know if that helped. Hi, Laura. After being with this topic here, I feel pretty skillful in my relationships with others, and I think that the area that needs more reflection light shine on is my relationship with myself. Well, that's usually the primary space for all of us. The more clear we are about ourselves, the more clear we're going to be about everything. Thanks for the comment, Laura. I'm glad that helps, Ciara. Yeah, you really can't step into conscious relationship not knowing yourself. Or rather, you can't step into it expecting the other person to know what to do to make you feel happy again in a spiritual way, right? There's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of misunderstandings about spirituality, and getting it to feel a certain way, getting us to feel a certain way, and getting others to make us feel a certain way, right? And once again, this goes back to my very initial point that nobody makes you feel anything. And on the spiritual path, as we go inwards, we continue to take more and more ownership and responsibility for our own feeling state. Whatever we're feeling is a choice. There are interesting biological things that I'm not going to go into this particular webinar. And I think there's certain predispositions, in terms of the hormones and neurotransmitters inside our bodies and for different people. But even so, we have a huge amount of autonomy, a huge amount of choice in what we feel inside us. I have this kind of funny thought in my idea sometimes, do a workshop in the future where part of what we do is we act like we're all at a sporting event, and we just pretend that our team won and just let out all this joy, right? Because that's what a lot of that actually is you go to sporting events because you want to feel joy. It's like you don't want your team to lose, because if that happens, we have a belief we should be sad. Aww. Right? But if they win, we're happy. Yay! So the workshop would be in part, at least to start everything off, with just have everybody just be insanely happy, just cheering and clapping and high fives and chest bumping and, running around doing a victory dance. We choose those feelings, and that would be the point of that workshop. It's like just giving ourselves that autonomy to be as ridiculously happy as we want to be. We don't always have to be that happy, but when you understand that in the sporting event is a large relationship with, in some cases, thousands of people that people have, just so they can feel happy, they can feel good, they can have that great big release. You can already have that at any time. It's just up to your own choice. It is such an empowering path. Would you love to attend that? You can do it now. It really is empowering. We just stop waiting for life to make us feel a certain way. We stop waiting to feel safe and happy. And when we do that, it really forces us to face more issues because we start to see all of our rules and all the old pain that's stuck inside that doesn't feel good. Right? Sometimes when people first hear me say this stuff, they're like, well, okay, this is easy. I'll just, stop trying stuff, and they stop, and they just start to feel bad. And they think they've done something wrong. They haven't. They've actually just started to pay attention to what's going on inside. Now, I don't really want to get into too many opinions about what can happen when you get more and more people growing consciously and owning their side of the of the street, owning their trash and owning their lightness. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for levels of growth we don't really fully know as a human community, because so much of what we do is so fear-based and pushing and pulling on each other. We're just acting like we're all at the edge of survival. We really are. And those are big issues to deal with. But I think if you just start to find some maybe new people in your life rather than trying to retrofit the current one, it doesn't mean you don't engage with it, but the more and more people you can bring into your life, the more different flavors of love and deep connection you can get used to, and to see what it's like when it evolves. I feel so blessed to have so many wonderful students because the nature of those conscious relationships is so different for everyone. And there's various levels of awareness in each one depending on where I'm at and how I'm connecting with somebody and where they are and how they're connecting to me. But I'm pointing to it because I also want you to understand just how many places this can be in your life. And obviously not everybody is going to join you in an overt conscious way, but just start there with a few people that you can meet in different meditation groups or even online to some degree, having those conversations so that you can start to get used to having these types of discussions and to offering yourself a new way and to really look at, like, how am I connecting to this person? What are the beliefs I'm bringing here? And, asking them to reflect back on the beliefs they're bringing, so you can start to understand what's going on in the actual relationship dynamic without just thinking it should work. And that to me is kind of the state of pretty much all relationships from the get-go, is you think it should work. If it doesn't play according to your rules, then it doesn't work and you don't like them. If it does work, then you do like them to varying degrees. Hi, Tobias. I love the phrase that you choose your feelings. Thank you for that. You're welcome. And you're going to be surprised at how often that you are unconsciously choosing a whole bunch of cruddy feelings. It's a very humbling thing to start to take ownership of that, but it's so important. And that leads to like blogs I've written about, like one's called Becoming Heart Strong. And if you haven't read that, I highly recommend you find it. It's the only one with a title of Heart Strong in it I have. We're coming towards the end, so if anyone has a question they haven't asked, please feel free to ask it. Many of you already know that this is a webinar service that's $351 for a year, each year, and I'm going through the renewal time period, and I've already raised like $315. So we're doing really well. So I only need $36 more. If any of you feel moved to donate, I greatly appreciate it. You don't have to, right? I do these for free. But those, with means and the desire to donate, here's the donation button on my blog on the right-hand side. And any amount is really appreciated. I've also got a new blog up for today. I've been doing it kind of every second Wednesday. So one Wednesday I'll post the next webinar that'll go up, and then the next I'll write a full blog again. I don't know how long we'll keep doing it, but today it's Signs of a Maturing Soul. It's not a complete list, but it offers some more ideas of what happens as we're getting used to engaging with issues and shifting and relaxing and dropping more into our own space. So does anyone have any last questions before we close? Thanks to everyone who has asked questions thus far. I appreciate them. I appreciate the vulnerability of asking. Tobias wants you to know about where you can read my own process. See, I don't really get into it because I think too often people are comparing themselves or thinking it should go a certain way. From time to time, I'll offer bits and pieces in a session as I think it's appropriate. But, it's too easy for people to build up spiritual teachers into people who are not. Sometimes, offering your story can help humanize, but at the same point, other people say, well, oh, he had this big experience hiking a mountain one time, and so I should do that. And it's like, no, it's how things worked for me that one time. So I don't really share too much of it anymore. Um, This is kind of my current choice around it. And I really just want to keep people focused on themselves and trusting your own process. And that however it's evolving for you is sacred. And thanks for the question and the comment, Tobias. And thanks to all of you for attending today. I think we'll close. So these are some ideas around tips for developing conscious relationships. I definitely encourage you to practice. I think it's a beautiful thing to offer to the world. And I think you'll be surprised that more than a few people will want to come along for the journey.